We, the citizens of America, are now joined in a great national effort to rebuild our country and restore its promise for all of our people. Because today, we are not merely transferring power from one administration to another or from one party to another, but we are transferring power from Washington, D.C., and giving it back to you, the people.
Well, welcome to the We the People Convention News and Opinion radio broadcast and podcast. My name is Tom Zawistowski, and I'm the president of the We the People Convention. I'm the host of this radio show, which airs every Saturday on 5 radio stations in Ohio and has podcasts throughout the country at wethepeopleconvention.org. For those of you who have never tuned into the show, the We the People Convention is a grassroots organization that is been started here in Ohio almost 10 years ago that educates fellow citizens about what affects them in government, what's going on in our government that they need to know about. And that's what you need to know about this show. This is a news summary show. So when you tune into the We the People Convention News and Opinion radio broadcast, what you're going to hear is a look at what happened this week, but really through the filter of why it's important to you. And then we're going to talk about what we're going to do about it. One of the things you'll hear on this show a lot is that we're not just about talk, we're about action. So we're very happy to have you with us, and we're very thankful for our donors that have helped to provide the money for us to be on the air this year. And we're very excited to announce that we've added another radio station. We want to say hello to everyone on our network. We are on WHKW 1220 AM from Cleveland at 9 a.m. on Saturdays mornings. We are on WTOH 98.9 FM in Columbus at 8:30 a.m. on Saturdays. We're also on WWVA 1170 AM from Wheeling, West Virginia at 7:30 a.m. on Saturdays. And we're on WCVX 1160 AM from Florence, Kentucky, which covers the Cincinnati-Dayton area at 9 a.m. on Saturdays. And we've just added a new station, WHK 1420 in Cleveland, and they'll be airing the show at 7:30 a.m. on Saturday mornings. And for those of you in Northeast Ohio who listen to the Bob Frantz Show and listen to 1420, why don't you give WHK a call and say thanks for putting the We the People Convention News and Opinion radio show on their station. That was something they didn't have to do, and we're just very appreciative that they ended up doing that. So so we're covering the state of Ohio pretty thoroughly this year. We do not have a station in the northwestern part of the state, and we're working on that, and hopefully we'll get something done there in the very near future. Now, as I said in our show, we're about taking action. So last week, I asked you to do something. I asked you to call Attorney General Bill Barr's office and tell him that you demand equal justice, and we want him to take action against these people who really tried to throw the presidential election in 2016 and have been undermining the president ever since. If you did not call him last week, or even if you did call him last week, we'd like you to call him again this week. His number is 202-353-1551, 202-353-1555. And we want you to call him and just say, we demand equal justice. If you want to write to him, you can go to justice.gov/contact-us. Justice.gov/contact.us, US. All right. And you'll get a little form there. You can write an email, and you can choose the Attorney General as the person you want to send it to, and let him know that you're really, want him to reestablish the rule of law. Because as we talked last week, without the rule of law, we are not a nation at all. The other thing I asked you to do last week was to listen to Bill Barr's religious freedom video on the We the People Convention website. And I'm really happy to say that I saw a lot of you did that. And I hope you were as impressed with that as I said you would be. And I hope that you've shared that with people in your family and in your church and in your community, because that's a very important video. So if you haven't done that, go to wethepeopleconvention.org. That's our main website, and look for the Bill Barr religious freedom video, which is right on the front page under the video section, and that'll be great. So the big news this week, which we covered last week a little bit, but now it's kind of played out, is the situation between the United States and Iran. So let's just take a quick second here to listen to the key parts to President Trump's statement about the situation with the U.S. and Iran.
Good morning. I'm pleased to inform you the American people should be extremely grateful and happy. No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime. We suffered no casualties. All of our soldiers are safe, and only minimal damage was sustained at our military bases. For far too long, all the way back to 1979 to be exact, nations have tolerated Iran's destructive and destabilizing behavior in the Middle East and beyond. Those days are over. Iran has been the leading sponsor of terrorism, and their pursuit of nuclear weapons threatens the civilized world. We will never let that happen. Soleimani's hands were drenched in both American and Iranian blood. He should have been terminated long ago. By removing Soleimani, we have sent a powerful message to terrorists. If you value your own life, you will not threaten the lives of our people. As we continue to evaluate options in response to Iranian aggression, the United States will immediately impose additional punishing economic sanctions on the Iranian regime. These powerful sanctions will remain until Iran changes its behavior. Iran must abandon its nuclear ambitions and end its support for terrorism. The time has come for the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Russia, and China to recognize this reality. They must now break away from the remnants of the Iran deal, or JCPOA. And we must all work together toward making a deal with Iran that makes the world a safer and more peaceful place. We must also make a deal that allows Iran to thrive and prosper and take advantage of its enormous untapped potential.
So as you can see, the president, really was acted with force against the Iranians by killing the general who was the head of the terrorists. But then he was restrained, even though they fired these missiles, and there's some talk that these missiles were intended to not really do any damage. The fact is that the president reached out and said, listen, if you want peace, we want peace, but this is how you get peace. And we're not going to let you kill our people. And we're not going to let you build nuclear weapons. And we're not going to let you threaten your neighbors. So if you want to be part of the international community, come on in, and we want you to do that. That's what we talked about last week. And if you go to WeThePeopleConvention.org and look at the page where that video is posted, I wrote a little essay that talked about how important it is to show strength in the Middle East. That's all they respect. And the president showed that. And once again, he showed that he really understands how to deal with these very difficult issues. Now, don't get me wrong. There's people saying we need to move out of, take all our troops out of Iraq, and we would all love to do that. The problem is the nuclear weapons. And I think that, this step where he's bringing in the international community and he's putting more sanctions on Iran could bring Iran to the table, because we actually need a strong Iran to check Turkey and to keep, the Middle East balanced, because of the Sunni Shiite, rivalries there. But if we're ever going to bring our soldiers home, this is how you're going to have to do it. It's not going to have to happen soon, but it is a step in the right direction. And I hope you're all as happy as I am with what the president did. Now, again, why do we talk about this? Well, we always talk about why is this important to us? So on the screen, if you're watching the podcast, and on the radio, I just wanted to point out that in Ohio, there are 61,833 of our fellow citizens who are involved in the military. There are 6,877 who are active duty. They're serving overseas, and their families are here. And the President of the United States took action to protect them, and none of them were killed or were hurt in this latest exchange. We have 28,337 National Guards members, and there are 24,957 Department of Defense civilian workers from Ohio, in Ohio, who are Ohio citizens. So one of the things you need to do, this week is reach out to the people who have sons or daughters, fathers, sons, brothers serving in the military, and thank them for what they did to protect us, and thank them for serving our country. Because without them, folks, we got nothing. So I just wanted to talk about the president's speech and put that in a little perspective. It's important to us because we're the people doing the fighting, right? It's not politicians. It's women from Ohio and places like Iowa and the Midwest and all over this country that fight those fights. And we thank the president for protecting our children and our friends and our relatives. The other story that was really coming up big this week is there was a story that came out about Governor Mike DeWine deciding to accept a bunch of refugees without really explaining why we're doing this. A story was posted in the Ohio Star this week that says Governor DeWine tells Trump administration to bring on the refugees despite foreign-born residents in the state having high rates of tuberculosis. DeWine sent a letter on December 24th to the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo giving permission for refugees to be placed in or settled in Ohio. The state of Ohio, says DeWine, has a long and successful history of welcoming and assimilating refugees from all corners of the globe. Ohio has also a well-developed support network to welcome and assimilate refugees, primarily led by our faith-based communities. In September, President Trump enacted a policy to allow states, cities, and counties the power to opt in or opt out of refugee resettlement. The intent was to stop resettlement groups from secretly dumping refugees in communities as they had done in the past. And so this caused a lot of confusion for those of us in the Tea Party movement, because we knew under the Obama administration, what they were doing is they were bringing in refugees into places like Minneapolis, Minnesota, and into Franklin County of central Ohio to try to change the vote. They were basically trying to change the balance of power, of voting power in those communities. But this doesn't make any sense. So it looks like DeWine has agreed to accept about 1,400 refugees. Now, I've been asking the White House, and I've been asking some of our members of the legislature, and I've talked to some other people, and the question is, are these people illegal immigrants? Are they legal immigrants? Or are they refugees? Well, apparently they're refugees, which means they're not legal American citizens. So now they're going to come into Ohio, and it costs about $100,000 per person for the state of Ohio to settle them. They don't have any skills, and they've got, apparently there's a problem with tuberculosis. And the question is, Governor DeWine, why are you doing this? And the other part of it is, where's the transparency? Where are you telling us how much this is really going to cost? And if this is, and I do understand, and this is a part of the puzzle, that apparently these are Christians. These are Christian refugees who are being persecuted in parts of the world. And so we do care about them. But shouldn't the Christian organizations be the ones that are bringing them in and taking care of them and not have them just dumped on the state? This is not merit-based immigration. And we quite frankly don't understand why we're even doing this. So we're going to investigate this story more, and we'll come back to you guys, when we have more information. But there's a lot more questions than answers about this. And again, our thing is, even at Ellis Island, they had to take a medical test, and they weren't allowed in the country if they weren't healthy. What are we doing bringing sick people into our country? Now, don't get me wrong. And before you get all excited and say, oh, you guys are just haters and all that stuff. We want legal immigration. We need legal immigration. Look at the statistics that just came out. The United States grew at 0.5% last year, meaning not even 1%. We got 7 million jobs in the United States that aren't filled. We would love to have immigrants come and fill those jobs. But what are we doing with these immigrants who aren't going to fill those jobs, who are sick and are going to cost us a bunch of money? And here you have these Catholic charities and Jewish charities and Presbyterians and Baptists. They all get paid about $20,000 per refugee to bring them here and drop them off. It costs them about $7,000 to do so, and they make like $13,000 profit. Catholic Charities makes millions of dollars from the federal government bringing refugees from overseas and dumping them in our communities. Well, we don't want them dumped in our communities. We want people to come into our communities in a way that we understand what the costs are and we know who's going to take care of them. And we just don't think this is the right thing. So we're going to be, reaching out to Governor DeWine, and we'll be talking to other people to try to figure out what the answer is here. But I think there's got to be some questions asked before this plan can be allowed to continue. And we hope that the legislature will get involved with that. All right, we're going to take a short break here to hear from a few of the groups that we support and who support us, and then we'll be back with more of the We the People Convention news and opinion, radio broadcasts, and podcasts. You're listening to Tom Zawistowski.
Hello, this is Ann Kasmerick, president of Liberty Camp for Kids in Portage County, Ohio. Liberty Camp for Kids is where students in grades 1 through 6 experience the founding of our nation. This year's camp will be held from July 20th through the 24th from 9 till noon. The cost is $30 per camper. If you're interested in our camp, being a volunteer, or even starting one of your own, go to www.libertycampforkids.com.
Buckeye Firearms Association is Ohio's #1 gun rights organization, protecting the rights of Ohio's 4 million gun owners. And you can get our weekly gun rights newsletter free. Receive breaking news and urgent alerts on gun laws. Stay up to date on self-defense and shooting sports. Discover pro-gun activities and events near you. Get your free gun rights newsletter now at bfanews.org. That's bfanews.org. bfanews.org.
All right, we're back, and we thank these sponsors for all that they do. We hope you'll support Buckeye Firearms, and we hope that you'll support the Liberty Camp for Kids as well. There's other things going on that you and I need to be aware of, and one of those things that's been really controversial is what's going on in Virginia with gun rights. There's an article on our website, wethepeopleconvention.org, that said, is Virginia where the shooting starts in the coming Civil War? Because the Democrats there are talking about gun confiscation, okay? And they're not kidding. They're serious about it. And we all understand that we can't let that happen. And so in Virginia, Michael Bloomberg put in a bunch of money there to elect a bunch of Democrats who are threatening to put in like 8 different gun laws with the goal of really taking away the guns of citizens. And there's this whole movement there that many of you are aware of where there's sanctuary counties, where various counties in Virginia are becoming Second Amendment sanctuary counties. And so we wanted to reach out to our friends in the NRA, and all of you who watch the show, listen to the show, know that the We the People Convention and the NRA are partners. We were in 2016, and we worked together, as I reported last week, to win the election, to win Ohio for Donald Trump and help him become president. And we are committed to doing that again in 2020. And we're going to be reaching out to all of you who listen to this show to help the NRA and us do that, to make the phone calls, knock on the doors, do the text messages, put out signs and things in the future. But we wanted to tap into what's going on in Virginia because we're afraid it's coming our way. So I was able to arrange to have an interview with an NRA spokesman, and I'd like to go to that interview right now. And what's happening in Virginia is really of concern to us, not only here in Ohio, but we have people that listen to our podcasts around the country. So we're very pleased to have with us today a spokeswoman from the NRA, Catherine Mortensen, who is basically their spokesperson for Virginia. And Catherine, I greatly appreciate you joining us on our program to tell us what's going on in Virginia with this very aggressive effort by the Bloomberg-controlled forces to, really restrict gun, ownership in Virginia. What's happening in Virginia?
Thank you so much for having me on. What's happening in Virginia? It's a train wreck. Michael Bloomberg came in with millions of dollars and vastly outspent the NRA and any other sort of coalitions of pro-gun groups here in the state. Vastly outspent us, and he bought and he paid for the slim majority that he has in the Virginia General Assembly. And Governor Northam is moving forward full speed ahead. He has a package of gun control bills that would lead to essentially gun confiscations in the state of Virginia. And we're fighting back. Every law-abiding Virginian who wants to protect themselves is fighting back.
Well, now, so the margin was slim. What is the margin between the Democrats and Republican in Virginia that you have to overcome in this battle right now? How many more votes do they have?
So in the Senate, it's on one hand, it's if we can peel off 2 or 3 of those senators, that's all we're looking for. So we're definitely strategically messaging to those particular senators, making sure that those elected officials hear from their members and let them know that they don't want this kind of gun control in Virginia.
That's right. Well, now there's a big event coming up now real soon. The Senate Court of Justice is meeting on January 13th. What is the NRA doing to help impact that particular court, meeting that's going to be held at the General Assembly? What are you guys planning?
So we are calling it our Legislative Action Day, and we have invited all our members from Virginia and supporters to show up, and we are encouraging them to make appointments ahead of time with their lawmakers and have those face-to-face, one-on-one meetings with either the elected official or their staff to express their opposition and to really tell their stories of what these gun laws would mean for them. As we've gone around the state holding town hall meetings with our members, I mean, we've heard really devastating stories. People who live, especially in rural Virginia, as you may have the same thing in rural Ohio, they don't have 30 minutes to wait for someone from law enforcement to get to their home.
Well, that's right.
They need the ability to protect themselves. And these people are very worried that that right will be taken from them.
Well, and that's again the absurdity of the whole Bloomberg idea that gun ownership is bad. I mean, we did a story on the We the People Convention website a couple weeks ago where we talked about how 90 times more people are saved by guns than are killed by guns. I mean, something in 2 million people a year protect themselves with their gun. And yes, while there are mass shootings, only 241 people died in those mass shootings last year, and the media made a big deal out of it. But these people in Virginia, this is really the Democratic Party's template for what they want to do to us nationally, isn't it, Catherine? Isn't this really where they're testing out all these rules that they want to pass nationally if they were ever, heaven forbid, if they would ever take over the White House and the Senate as well?
Absolutely, Tom. That's exactly what they're doing. We've seen the Bloomberg strategy. He started out in some of those western states like Colorado and New Mexico, Washington State, Oregon, and he had success. And this, we think, is his first attempt at sort of a complete takeover here in Virginia, where he has the House, the Senate, the governor's office. They have a package of 9 bills that Governor Northam is backing that would just devastate Virginia gun owners and devastate their ability to protect and defend themselves. So we do think you're right. This is where he's going with it. I mean, he's running for president. So this is what he wants to bring to the rest of the country. And I think that our message to people in Ohio is watch what's happening in Virginia, get your people mobilized, get them engaged, because the fight's coming to you.
Yeah, well, just yesterday, Bloomberg was here in Akron, Ohio, and he announced that he was hiring 60 full-time staff for his presidential campaign. But as we know, even if he doesn't win the presidency, he's going to keep those people here in Ohio to try to implement the same kind of legislative changes that he's doing in Virginia. So we're very much aware of what Bloomberg's up to, and we are very happy that you and the NRA are really getting all your people engaged, and you've got a plan to fight this. Now, the Sanctuary County program that's going on, is that something that you think we in Ohio should start looking at? Should we start to get ahead of the game? Is that something the NRA sees as a positive thing in Virginia?
Well, here, the Sanctuary County movement in Virginia was a totally organic movement.
Yeah.
That started from the grassroots. It's something the people are demanding. They're going to their local, county level elected officials And that's a movement that the NRA has not been a part of. It is happening on its own, and it has spread like wildfire across the state. In fact, I just saw that Virginia Beach, that was the site of this tragic shooting that sort of was the impetus for all of Northam's gun control bills.
Right. Yep.
That community just voted to become a sanctuary city for the Second Amendment. So
That's
there's
important.
definitely support for that.
Yeah, I think that we're going to have to look at that here in Ohio. Okay, well, I assure you that we in Ohio will be contacting our friends in Virginia and having them support you. And we're going to be very interested in following this. And I hope you'll come back and talk to us again as we see how this proceeds. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Tom.
So that was Catherine Mortensen from the NRA. We thank her for joining us. And I think, all of you listening are as concerned as I am about what's going on there and what might be happening in Ohio with the gun issue. So we'll keep an eye on that going forward. We're going to take another break and then we'll be back. You're listening to the We the People Convention News and Opinion radio broadcast and podcast. You can view the We the People Convention News and Opinion podcast anytime you want, 24/7, 365 days per year, by just going to wethepeopleconvention.org. And then right on the front page, you'll see the podcast player. And if you click on the blue playlist, it'll show you all of our most recent podcasts. You can also find out by clicking on the yellow button on the front page and going to the We the People live podcast page of the website, how you can listen to the broadcast on Facebook or YouTube, on Roku TV or Amazon Fire TV, and get a complete list of our stations that broadcast our podcasts on the radio every Saturday morning, including a map with the Ohio stations indicated. So be sure to tune in when it's convenient for you. And if you have comments about the show, don't hesitate to write to us at info@wethepeopleconvention.org and tell us what you think about the show or what topics you'd like us to cover. All right, and we thank you for listening to today's program. The way that this works is that we will continue after we sign off to do the podcasts, which will last almost another hour. And so you can go to the wethepeopleconvention.org website and click on the archive for today's show, and then fast forward. You can just take your mouse and fast forward past the parts that you already heard here on the radio and watch the rest of the podcast. We're going to be talking about some important things like General Flynn's situation where they want to sentence him to 6 months in jail, the settlement with the Covington Kids. We're going to talk about a lot of voter fraud issues. And we're going to talk about the state of our Constitution. That's going to be a pretty deep conversation we're going to have later in the podcast. So we hope that you will join us by going to the wethepeopleconvention.org website and listening to the rest of the podcast after this radio program has ended. Again, we thank you for listening to We the People Convention News and Opinion. The We the People Convention News and Opinion radio program is paid for by donors like you. You can donate to the We the People Convention and support our cause by going to wethepeopleconvention.org or by sending your check in any amount to We the People Convention, P.O. Box 6211, Akron, Ohio 44312. All right, and we're back, and we welcome you back to the podcast. As I said before, we made the transition from the radio program. That one of the things we're going to talk about is Michael Flynn, General Michael Flynn, and the fact that the Department of Justice has recommended that he get a 6-month prison sentence for "quote unquote" lying to the FBI. Now, I have to tell you, this is a very personal thing for me. I've met General Flynn. I've corresponded with him over the last 3 years. We've actually tried to raise some money to help him with his legal fees. And this decision by the Department of Justice is just an outrage to me. This is just unbelievable because, folks, the bottom line is General Flynn did nothing wrong. This is literally just the revenge of the Obama administration. He was set up. Comey admitted on live TV that they should have told Flynn that he needed a lawyer. they knew that they could send McCabe and these other FBI agents to the White House to interview Flynn, and they even told him, you don't need a lawyer. Then McCabe actually testified after they had interviewed Flynn that he didn't lie about the conversation that he had had with the Russian ambassador right in the transition period when Trump was taking over the White House. And then they ended up pressuring General Flynn and to the point where they were threatening his children. And he pleaded guilty to a lie, to a misstatement. That's what the lie was. It was a misstatement so they wouldn't go after his kid. He had to sell his house. Now, this is a guy who's been in the military his whole life. He doesn't have millions of dollars, right? This isn't Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort was worth $100 million or something. General Flynn is a soldier, and he served his country with valor and dignity. And our country is destroying his life. And the worst part about it is that this piece of crap, McCabe, who from the FBI, he was recommended by the IG. He was recommended for criminal charges on April 19th of 2018. That's almost 2 years ago. The IG said that the Department of Justice should charge McCabe with lying to the FBI, just like they're charging General Flynn. But they haven't charged him. They haven't charged McCabe. And here's the worst of it. Just recently, in the last couple weeks, I was on January 2nd, it came out that there was actual proof. There was testimony or transcripts released from the Department of Justice Inspector General's office, which found that McCabe actually admitted to the investigators that he had lied about leaking to the New York Times and leaking to the media. So now the IG found that he lied, said that the DOJ should charge him. They haven't charged him for 2 years. Now we have actual evidence of McCabe admitting that he lied, and nothing is happening to him, but they're going to send an innocent 3-star general to prison. This is why you need to call Attorney General Bill Barr at 202-353-1555. This is ridiculous. This is a travesty. And I think without any doubt that we should have President Trump pardon General Flynn if indeed this 6-month sentence comes down. But even that's not good enough. We need Congress to reimburse him for taking away his life. It's just horrible. And it goes right into our next story with the settlement of this lawsuit with CNN and the lawsuit with the Covington Catholic student, Nick Sandman. Now, again, a lot of people are saying, all right, this guy's going to get some money from CNN, right? I think they sued CNN for $800 million. They didn't renounce what the settlement was. And he also has lawsuits against the Washington Post and some other media groups. And that's good. But from the beginning of this, when they attacked these young high school students for wearing a MAGA cap, okay, totally out of line. They had no business doing that. They completely lied about the whole story, right? But my concern is, where is our law enforcement? See, we have laws in this country. In Ohio, we just passed a law that says you cannot go after underage children, online, in social media, or any other way. All this anti-bullying stuff. These kids from Covington Catholic, these are students. They're 16 years old. They're minors. And so we wanted the FBI, we wanted the Department of Justice to press charges. We happen to know that there were messages left on the parents' voicemail in a law firm in Cincinnati threatening the parent of one of these kids. And yet, no prosecutor in Ohio. We talked to Dave Yost, our Attorney General. They did nothing to prosecute these people. See, it isn't good enough for CNN to get a financial penalty through a legal action. We, as a culture, need to make it clear you cannot target our children. That's what we needed, and we didn't get it. And that's why we're struggling in our country with equal justice, because there isn't any equal justice. And okay, so they're going to get this money, but that's not going to stop CNN. There should have been criminal penalties because what they did was criminal. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next story. The next story is a very interesting story that came to me from one of our listeners and viewers. And again, I'm not any smarter than any of you. I mean, I do this radio show. I try to do a competent job of that. I try to give you information maybe you don't have, right? But the reason that I am able to, to know about a lot of things that you don't know about is because people like you send me stuff every day. I've got like 10,000 people feeding me information and helping me see what's true and what's not true. And this is a case that, just happened with this story, which none of us had seen and I hadn't seen. So here's the story. This is from Trevor Loudon, and many of you may have met Trevor Loudon or know him. He's been around for 4 or 5 years. He's a guy from New Zealand who really got involved in the 2016 election and came to speak a lot of Tea Party groups. And he wrote an article in the Epoch Times that said 40 million new Democratic voters. Will the State Power Caucus destroy America? In this article, he says a shadowy new alliance led by pro-China communists plans to mobilize 40 million new Democratic voters for the 2020 election. This group, firstly known as the State-Based Power Caucus, and now simply the State Power Caucus, has the ability to mobilize thousands of volunteers and paid staff in New York, California, Washington, Oregon, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Minnesota, Ohio, Illinois, Missouri, Kentucky, Mississippi, Virginia, Georgia, Florida, and Texas. And they're out there trying to register 40 million new Democratic voters. See, so this is the concern that you and I have to have. We know that we must reelect Donald Trump. We know that Donald Trump's policies are very popular. And that, the survey data I have says that if the election were today, Donald Trump would win Ohio and would win hands down. But our concern is that the left, and this is the communist left, and again, doesn't it make sense? President Trump is standing up to China. So why wouldn't the Chinese fund these groups to try to throw him out of office? It makes sense, doesn't it? Now, I don't think that's legal. And again, I question, where's our law enforcement with this? That you've got foreign governments funding these voter registration campaigns. But the point of the matter is, we're going to have to react to that. You and I. We're going to have to register voters. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. Before I do that, I want to talk to you about a story that came out by Judicial Watch. And as you know, we're very close to Judicial Watch. Tom Fenton and Chris Farrell and those guys have been to Ohio. They were at the We the People convention we just had in September. And Judicial Watch finds millions of extra registrants on voting rolls. Warns California, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Colorado, Virginia to clean up their voter rolls or face a federal lawsuit. At least 2.5 million extra names on voting rolls have been found by Judicial Watch. And again, these are in big counties in those states where there's more people on the voter rolls than are adults in that community. And so this is against the Voters' Rights Act. And we've seen even Ohio years ago, a couple years back, Judicial Watch filed suit in Ohio and said, you got to clean up your voter rolls. And in Cuyahoga County, they used to have like 500,000 more people on the voter rolls than were living in the county. This is what we're afraid of. This is why, as this show goes on, this podcast goes on, we're going to be talking about us working at the polls and working for the boards of elections to make sure that cheating doesn't happen. Because that's the threat as I see it. It's not Donald Trump's policies. It's going to be about, whether, they register voters and turn them out and turn the tide of this election. So here's the thing I want to tell you. There's 9 million people in Ohio, 9 million adults in Ohio, okay? Only 7.2 million of them are registered to vote. There's 1.8 million people in Ohio who are eligible to vote who haven't voted, who aren't even registered to vote. And here's the other dirty little secret. And we learned this from Secretary of State Frank LaRose at the We the People convention that he came and spoke at. Those people are in rural counties. They're not in cities. These are in the red counties. And you and I have to take responsibility and go and register these people. And the good news is we can do that easier now than we've ever been able to, because you can now register to vote in Ohio online. And so I'm going to play a little video about that so you can see how you can help register people here in Ohio. To register to vote in Ohio, you go to the Secretary of State's website, which is sos.state.ohio.us. And you can navigate through that website, but the place where you can register online is olvr.ohiosos.gov. OLVR stands for Online Voter Registration. .ohiosos.gov is the website. And so for the first time, you can actually register online with an Ohio driver's license, your name, your date of birth, your address, and the last 4 digits of your social security number. And it's really an easy process. And you need to start asking people in your community to just go to olvr.ohiosos.gov and sign up. That's the bottom line. It's right online. And if you put that on your phone, you will be able to tell people that they can register as soon as you find out. You'll be in a restaurant, you can be at church, you can be at a sporting event, and you can say, hey, Bill or Jane, are you registered to vote? And if they say, no, I'm not, maybe they lived in another state and they moved here and they just never decided to register, but you can register them right online, and that's what we need to do, because that's what the Democrats are doing. So there you have it, right in your hands. Just go to the Secretary of State's website, click through, and you'll find the link to register online. Save that as a bookmark on your phone. And literally, when you find someone that isn't registered, just take out your phone and say, let's do it right now. Let's do it right now. And there's no voter fraud in this. They don't just get registered. They check up on them once they file and all that stuff. They'll have to get a postcard or something, but this is something we need to do, because the left's going to do that. So now, before I get to my last topic, we're going to take a quick break and again hear from some of our sponsors. You're listening to the We the People Convention News and Opinion radio program and podcast, and my name is Tom Zawistowski.
This is Jordan Seculo with the American Center for Law and Justice. At the ACLJ, we are committed to fighting the deep state and protecting freedom, the right to life, religious liberty, and fighting for the Constitution. The ACLJ has experienced tremendous success in litigating cases at all levels of the judiciary, from the federal district court level to the Supreme Court of the United States. We have offices in Washington, D.C., Jerusalem, and all around the world. You can find out more about the ACLJ and join us by visiting aclj.org.
Buckeye Firearms Association is Ohio's #1 gun rights organization, protecting the rights of Ohio's 4 million gun owners. And you can get our weekly gun rights newsletter free. Receive breaking news and urgent alerts on gun laws. Stay up to date on self-defense and shooting sports. Discover pro-gun activities and events near you. Get your free gun rights newsletter now at bfanews.org. That's bfanews.org. bfanews.org.
All right. So now I'm going to go into our last topic in today's podcast. And, you're going to have to sit back and relax and take this in, because one of the things I think we've got to do is we've got to understand what our real situation is in the United States. Okay? I don't think most of us really have a clue. Now, what do I mean by that? What I'm specifically talking about is all the frustration we all have. Like, for instance, with this stupid impeachment thing, where, we're reading the Constitution and everyone's saying that's unconstitutional. No, it's not, blah, blah, blah. Here's the reality. That Constitution that we've been reading, the one that we got, when we started with the Tea Party movement, and we've all read it, the problem is that doesn't exist anymore. That's not the Constitution that we're under right now. And we have an unbelievable fight on our hands to get back to that kind of government. Because what we have now is nothing like that. And I'm going to give you some really harsh examples of that. All right. I mean, we're going to talk about that. But let me just explain to you that this all ended in 1932 with Woodrow Wilson. I was watching some podcast and they talked about the fact that before Wilson came in and destroyed our Constitution, okay, and basically made our government as big as it is and got them involved in our lives in every aspect. If you lived in the United States from its founding in 1779 until 1930, your only involvement with the federal government during your whole life probably would have been the post office. They had nothing to do with your life. The federal government defended the nation against foreign aggression. They were involved with tariffs, and they helped to figure out whenever there were states that had an issue about, building a bridge over their boundaries, who was going to pay for it, whatever. They weren't what they are today. And so now there's a guy that wrote a book about 3 years ago. His name was Charles Murray. And his book was called Conservative Civil Disobedience. And you can find a speech where these clips are going to come from that he spoke at Hillsdale College 3 years ago. But now we're going to take this in three pieces. And the first piece, I think, is really where you understand that we are not living in the Constitution of our founding fathers anymore. Listen to what he has to say.
Furthermore, I think that the prospects for using the political process to roll back the reach of government are not good. And let me give you some reasons why. The first of these reasons is that the Constitution, as intended by the founders, is in fact broken beyond repair. And this is something I did not believe when I first started writing the book. I had this impression that we had a series of constitutional decisions over a long period of time that nudged things in the wrong direction on a slippery slope, and we can nudge them back in the right direction. And I was wrong about that. In the 1930s, from 1937 to 1942, there were a handful of Supreme Court decisions which did not nudge. They just simply flipped. Hugely important constructs of the American Constitution in ways you can't really reverse. Let me use the most famous example of this is Helvering v. Davis. That was the case in which the Supreme Court of the United States said that Social Security was constitutional, even though Social Security did not fall under any of the enumerated powers by any stretch of the imagination. And what the justices of the Supreme Court did was to take this phrase, general welfare, which is in the sentence introducing the enumerated powers, and said, what general welfare means is that in addition to the enumerated powers, Congress can spend on anything which promotes the general welfare. For those of you who are historians of the Revolutionary and Constitutional era, you will remember that during the constitutional ratification debates, the meaning of that phrase was debated endlessly, not with two equal sides arguing whether it did or did not confer this power on the Congress, but rather people saying, that better not mean that it gives that general power. And you had Madison and Jay and the other founders, including Alexander Hamilton, who said, no, 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 no. It does not do anything of the sort. Well, the Supreme Court said, well, actually it does. Problem is, you can't reverse that. Because if you got 9 Nino Scalias or 9 Clarence Thomases on the court who wanted to reverse Helvering because it wasn't constitutional, they would be declaring that 95% of all spending of the federal government is unconstitutional. No Supreme Court can do that. No president would enforce it. The Supreme Court's legitimacy would be shattered. And the same is true for a variety of other ways in which the Constitution does not mean what the founders wanted it to mean, but we can't go home again.
So, how's that? Right? Here is a radical court completely misinterpreting the will of the founders and opening up the floodgates for the federal government to get into everything we don't want them in. And that's what we've got today. But the part you had to hear was that we can't reverse it, because if they ruled it unconstitutional, 95% of the spending in our government would be illegal. Think about that. That's why we're in the situation we're in. And we've got to figure out a way to fix that. But that's not the only problems. Let's go on to the next thing he points out.
Another way in which we can't use the political process to roll back the use of government has to do with the regulatory state, which I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on today. This is because there have been a couple of things that have gone on. One is that, again, through Supreme Court decision, it is now okay for Congress to pass a very general law saying we want clean air, and then leave it up to the bureaucrats to implement and create the rules that operationalize what the legislation said. That's new too. That came about in the 1930s. Before that, the Constitution very clearly says all legislative power shall be vested in Congress of the United States, and what they're doing is delegating legislative power. But it gets worse. Not only do the regulatory agencies make up the rules, in effect creating legislation, they also act as police and courts. Some of you may not know this. I didn't know it before I started writing the book. If the EPA, let's say, comes after you for violating an environmental rule and you want to fight it, guess what? You don't go to a regular court with a regular judge with a jury of your peers. You go to what's called an administrative court. And the judge in that administrative court, because there is no jury, is appointed by the EPA. If surprise, surprise, the judge finds that you are in fact in violation of this regulation and you appeal it, you go before an appeals court, which is composed of people appointed by the EPA. And if you finally manage to get out of that into, and there are some cases when you can finally get into a regular federal court, you have a Supreme Court precedent which says, well, we are going to give the benefit of the doubt to the regulatory agency's position if there is any rationale whatsoever for the rule they just made. If this sounds Kafkaesque to you, it is because it is Kafkaesque. But you are not going to get the federal government to say, wait a minute, we're going to start writing legislation again that actually spells out what we want the regulatory agencies to do.
So how's that representative government? How's that? Who's representing us? These are unelected bureaucrats who have more power over us than basically anybody. This is what we need to understand. This is not equal justice under the law. There is no law. These administrative courts. These are like third world nations. And we're a long way from reeling this in. That's why we have so many problems. That's why the Obama administration was so easily able to attack us, to attack you with OSHA and the EPA and didn't NHS, NSA, anybody they wanted. Because these people are accountable to no one because our government and our legislature made it so. And the courts backed them up. And so the only way we're ever going to change that is by changing the courts and changing the laws. But we got a long way to go to do that. And so now there's another big problem we got to talk about that Mr. Murray points out, that we have to realize these are the realities of our life, okay? These aren't negatives. We just need to understand the realities before we can solve the problem. And so listen to this final piece.
The reason you aren't going to do that goes to the third problem with making progress through the political process, and that is the systemic corruption that now characterizes Washington, D.C. I do not mean that senators and representatives that we have now are more venal or dishonest than they were in the past. I don't think that's true, actually. What we do have is a system which is systemically corrupt. Think of a kleptocracy in a Central Asian country or Southeast Asian country or a Sub-Saharan African country. How do they work? through bribes. Everything has to have a bribe. You can't get into an office to see somebody unless you pay a bribe. You can't get the legislation to pass anything unless you pay bribes. But if you do pay bribes, you can get a lot of things done. You can get special permissions for your company. You can even get special laws passed which cripple your competitor's ability to compete with you. You can do all sorts of things if you spend enough money. If you substitute for the word bribe campaign contributions, I've just described the way Washington works. I suggest to any of you who have a beef that you need the help of your member of the House of Representatives to help you on, try getting his or her time to hear you out unless you have made an appropriate campaign contribution. It will not, with a very few exceptions, happen. But if you do make the right contributions and so forth, there are all sorts of ways in which the outcomes that you get in a kleptocracy are also the outcomes you can get through Washington.
So you've got the Supreme Court telling, basically destroying the Constitution and saying that the federal government can do anything it wants, get involved in our lives in every aspect. You've got the courts and the legislature creating the bureaucratic state that is ruling over us and is telling us what we can and can't do with our lives without any real authority to do so. And then you've got this corrupt political process where basically the only way you have access to any elected official is through bribery, through quote unquote campaign contributions. This is the reality that we live in. And then the final piece is today, I sent out an email that some of you may have gotten if you live in Ohio, where I was making fun of the Ohio, quote, Republican Party, because it's not a political party at all. Because what I'm pointing out to people in Ohio is that the Republican primary is supposed to be March 17th, but today, Friday the 10th, they're voting to endorse every race in the state. And by doing so, they're making sure that you don't have a vote. Both political parties are corrupt to the core. They don't even believe in representative government, and they sure don't believe in fair votes. They're all about power and money and control of us and our tax dollars. That's what they're about. And so we, the people, have to have a view of what the battle space is, what we're really facing, so that we can focus on the real fights that have to be won in order to get to the other fights. All those things I just played for you that Mr. Murray talked about, we're not fixing that this year. You and I have to focus everything we've got. See, because our country is almost lost. If Donald Trump was not elected, if we did not elect Donald Trump against all odds, the United States of America doesn't exist anymore. We are either in a civil war because Hillary Clinton would have foolishly tried to take our guns, or we have no borders, we have unbelievable illegal immigration, and we're part of the global one world government. That's how close we came. Now, we got a chance to win because we elected Donald Trump. But it's still the tipping point. And the tipping point right now are two things. We must establish the rule of law. We cannot let the people go after General Flynn and not go after McCabe. We can't have the media attacking children and destroying their lives and not have our government stand up and defend them. You can't have people in Virginia afraid that the government is going to send people to take the guns from them by force. So we have to establish a rule of law, and that means that you've got to call AG Bill Barr every day and encourage him and say, please reestablish the rule of law. Call Bill Barr at 202-353-1555, 202-353-1555, or write to him at justice.gov/contact-us. There's a reason why I'm begging to do this, because I'm concerned that if we don't get Bill Barr to charge McCabe and Comey and Strzok and Page and Rice and all these people who absolutely broke the law and tried to rig the 2016 election, then they're going to steal the 2020 election. We can't survive that. And then if we can get Bill Barr to do that, we've got to go out and work our tails off. We've got to register voters. We've got to get out our vote. We've got to knock on doors and make phone calls. We must make sure that Donald Trump is reelected. It's our only chance. And then once that happens, once you get Donald Trump back in, once there is the rule of law and the left is now not being funded by our government and is in fears being arrested and sentenced for the things that they're doing when they've been doing this their whole lives with impunity, now we're on a more even playing field. Then we've got to go after the electoral process. And what that's going to mean is we're going to have to finally get Donald Trump, hopefully in 2022, to realize how corrupt the Republican and Democratic parties are and help us put real Americans up to run for government. And then once you have those people in Congress, once we elect those people who are like us, who are going to give their service to the American people and not go there to take bribes and get rich, then we can vote out some of these judges. Then we can change laws. Then we can reestablish our Constitution. It's not going to take a year. It took 100 years to destroy it. I pray it's not going to take 100 years to restore it. But I know one thing, it starts right now, and it starts right here with you and I. I sure appreciate you tuning in. I hope this information was valuable to you. I'm sharing it to you because it's important. I think you need to know this. And I know it's not all fun and games. Life isn't all fun and games. But we, the American people, have stood up throughout our history to defend our Constitution. We just need to understand what a big job we've got to do and then start taking steps to get there. Thanks again for watching the podcast and listening to the radio show. We'll see you again next week. This is Tom Zawistowski, president of the We the People Convention, for the We the People Convention News and Opinion radio program and podcast.